In other words, we would provide the tools. We wouldn't fight. It wouldn't be our boots on the ground, as people like to say now, but it would be our weapons. And, Britain had nothing to really trade with us, as she had traded bases for destroyers. She couldn't pay cash and come over here. So as we said, FDR comes up with this plan, and here you see some of the numbers. As I said yesterday, probably almost close to $1 trillion in aid in dollars we have today. And we didn't get that money back, y'all. That was money that we gave. It's a loan, right, in terms of weapons, but we did not get that back. Sadly, at the end of World War II, we didn't want a lot of those weapons back, and they would all just be dumped. As I said, Roosevelt compared it to a neighbor having a fire. The neighbor's house is on fire. He asks you for a water hose. Do you bargain with him like, well, I don't know if I'm going to loan you my water hose. I mean, what if I lose that water hose? What do? You give it to him and you say, hey, return it when you're done. And so that was the way that he tried to explain it to the American people. And supposedly these weapons would be returned after the war. But like I said, that didn't really happen. Okay. Now, the next thing here is what's known as the four freedoms. You could easily have maybe a diagram or a picture of these four freedoms on the test. It's something still to know. So in January 1941, right, this is a year, or not quite a year, 11 months before Pearl Harbor, FDR proposed loaning Britain the money, right? So we got, once again, kind of like that, and to loan the money for war materials. And he said Britain would be protecting the four freedoms. And these were the four freedoms, and I've got a place for you guys to write at the bottom of page 13. One of the freedoms is freedom of speech. The picture I had of that just kind of disappeared there. You saw it briefly. Freedom of religion. You see people there praying, different faiths, right? Freedom from want. In other words, freedom from hunger or freedom from lacking things. And finally, freedom from fear. Now, I know it's kind of hard to see up here the name, but there was a painter by the name of Norman Rockwell. Norman Rockwell, R-O-C-K-W-E-L-L. Norman Rockwell did these series of paintings. And these went around the country, y'all, for people to come and see and to get excited about and to donate money to help the British. I remember as a kid in the 60s seeing these as stamps. And, I guess in the 90s or early 2000s, I was visiting a friend of mine who lives up there where my ex-wife lives, and where my daughter then was living. And so we went to go see Rockwell's studio, and they had the OGs, the original, I should say OPs, because the original paintings on display. And here is one of them, right? This is the freedom from want. Now, of course, and you see them serving turkey, right? And that is a big turkey. Look at the size of that turkey. That turkey is huge. Serving it. Of course, people have made fun of it. There was a version done a few years ago of kind of a different family getting Kentucky Fried Chicken served, and everybody sitting around with Budweisers and stuff. Somebody always has to satirize stuff and make fun of our things. Grandma there with the cigarette and KFC. But there. So the next thing here is the Atlantic Charter. Definitely AP would like to ask about this. Anything with diplomacy, especially, y'all, is an AP favorite thing to ask. So what happened here was Churchill and Roosevelt signed the Atlantic Charter. That's what your first blank should say here. And what this does, I think I skipped a slide there when I was moving around, it solidified our alliance with the British. It solidified our alliance with the British. It was a way to make it formal, because this is a formal agreement between the American president and Winston Churchill, who, if you guys remember, was the British prime minister. It was fashioned after the 14 points, the 14 points of Woodrow Wilson. Basically, what we were saying here is that we were going to, it was our plan for the war, but more importantly, for the world after the war. What would we agree on in this war, and what kind of world did we want to say? Okay, now, and you can see a picture of Roosevelt and Churchill there. They're on board a battleship, which ironically will end up getting sunk just after Pearl Harbor, the Prince of Wales, a British ship. But among the things, and y'all don't have to fill it in there, I wrote the goals of the Atlantic Charter, the goals of the war, the goals of the world afterwards. Just kind of read that, maybe highlight some of the more important ones. No territorial aggrandizement. What does that mean? Nobody gets extra territory as a result of this war. We don't want that to be a reason why people go to war. No changes against the wishes of a people. Boy, that got thrown out, y'all, because they literally kicked a bunch of Germans out of area and they scooted Poland over. We actually scooted a country westward, y'all, after World War II. Any of the governments that had been lost, like Czechoslovakia's and Austria's, those would be restored that the Nazis had taken away. We would try to get rid of trade restrictions. That didn't go really, really well, but a lot of people thought that was one of the reasons for war. Global cooperation, trying to make the world a better place for all people. And then there you see the freedom from fear, freedom from want, that was part of the 4 freedoms. Freedom of the seas, the idea being that you should be able to trade with whatever country you want. You should be able to travel on ships through these places, which is kind of a naive and kind of idealistic, when you think of if a war is going on, to just let people just go right on through. Trying to abandon the use of force and to disarm the aggressor nations. Now, we're not saying everybody else should disarm, the people who are on the Allied side, but that. And I didn't put it in here, y'all, but it's interesting because for the first time, we see the words United Nations. For allies, Churchill and Roosevelt says that the people on our side are fighting as United Nations. And indeed, y'all, that will be the name of the organization that will replace the League of Nations after the war. The final thing, y'all, that's going to lead to our breaking with Japan and then get Japan to go ahead and plan Pearl Harbor is the invasion of Indochina. And that is basically present-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Present-day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Now, what happens, okay, is when these countries, and kind of like, I'll explain kind of how this happened. Remember, the French, y'all, in May and June of 1940 had gotten taken over really, really quickly. The French controlled Indochina. In fact, a lot of people called it French Indochina. They got taken over, and so they couldn't really defend their colonies anymore. And basically, y'all, the Japanese worked with that Vichy government, that non-occupied part of France that I mentioned yesterday, I think. And they went ahead and said, well, Japan, if you want to use our ports, if you want to station troops here, that's okay. And so you're going to see this area occupied. Now remember, why is Japan doing all this? Well, Japan needs resources. Japan feels it is a superior nation to these other countries, and what's theirs should be Japan's, right? Japan should be able just to take these things. Now, America is going to take a series of steps. One of the things we're going to do is to freeze Japanese assets. What does that mean? Well, I don't know. It's been cold before when I lived in Canada, and I froze my assets a lot. Not that kind of assets. We're talking money, right? All Japanese investment, all money that they had in banks here, they couldn't get anymore. This is a very common kind of thing. When the Russians, y'all, went into Ukraine a couple years or so ago, we did the same thing. We froze Russian assets. So deprive them of getting their stuff. Also, back in the day, y'all, we used to sell a lot of the world oil. We were a major oil exporter. I know that sounds like crackhead talk, but it was true. We also stopped selling them scrap iron. Now, this just didn't happen all in one day. These were a series of steps, but if you just know, how did we try to respond to the Japanese aggression? In this case, we're getting a little bit more serious. We're freezing their assets. We're just not condemning them. We're not selling them oil, which they need. We're not selling them scrap iron. And they really had come to believe, I told y'all yesterday I'm reading this massive book on Pearl Harbor, and of course the actual attack is like the last few pages. Everything else is about the stuff leading to it. But the Japanese really thought, y'all, maybe they had enough oil for 6 months to a year maximum that they had stored up. And so they really felt like they were being painted into a corner, right? And they didn't have iron, which of course they could use to make into steel, right? So this is when Japan begins to plan the attack. They began to first think of it as an idea. Once they accepted it could be a possibility, they had to plan for it. And it's, like I said in this book, I'm learning so much. It's neat that somebody like me, as old as I am, can we come to y'all the attack.
We interrupt this program to bring you a special news.
To get out to Pearl Harbor or to Hawaii. They would be negotiating, hoping that we would back down. We would unfreeze the assets. And we were hoping they would remove their troops from Indochina, or we hoped they'd make some deal with China. Both sides were hoping, but I think both sides kind of knew this was not going to end really well.